world is truly on edge due to the Ukraine crisis.
As the fear of a third world war grows with each passing day and the drums of war beat between Russia and Ukraine, Biden reiterated his call for Russia to withdraw its troops from the border.
All of Russia and Ukraine are blaming each other.
Approximately 7,000 more Russian soldiers have been killed by Ukrainian soldiers.
It is saddening that there is an atmosphere of war.
Will they attack on February 16th?
Being close to the front lines. A war, it is likely that a war will start immediately.
We could be mediators for peace to prevail between Russia and Ukraine.
For some time, the whole world has been watching our northern neighbor, Ukraine. Two interconnected questions are being asked. Will Russia attempt an invasion? And if so, when will it happen? There is a general perception like this. What can a tiny Ukraine do against a vast Russia, caught up in its own troubles? The general attitude of the people in Turkey can be summarized in two words. Why should I care? However, we are not facing a situation where anyone can just say, why should I care? We are looking at a country where Turkish brands are strong. It is a growing market. Its economy is stable. And this is very important. It has single-digit inflation. Moreover, we cannot just belittle it as a tiny Ukraine. We are facing the largest country in Europe by land area. So, the threat in the region concerns us, Turkey, the most after Ukraine. Since that's the case, let's take a closer interest. What is everyone else doing? Let's also understand it from our perspective. The surroundings of Ukraine right next to us. Surrounded by Russia, Belarus, Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Moldova. It can also be considered our neighbor across the Black Sea. In fact, we are so close. Sinop Yaltiari. The distance is less than 150 miles or 300 kilometers as the crow flies or as the fish swims. And Yalta hasn't been part of Ukraine for 5 years anyway. Crimea has quietly passed into Russia's hands. However, Putin wants more than just Crimea and Yalta for Russia. I'm sure you'll give different answers to this question. Some might smile slyly and recall Cem Yılmaz's commentary on the Kiev away game. Some might say they support the Femin movement focused on social responsibility as the most important export product. Some might let out a deep sigh, while others might respond with, she could be your sister-in-law. These results are understandable, but Ukrainian? The rate of Ukrainian women marrying foreigners is increasing exponentially, and Turks rank first on hundreds of matchmaking sites. The reason for this is that there are 86 men for every 100 women in the adult population. So, as you can understand, 14% still offer the promise of a potential marriage.
Your beauty is the talk of the world. Your beauty is the talk of the world.
Those interested in Ottoman history might view Ukraine differently, because 6 sultans of the dynasty made their marital choices in the same direction. The first Ukrainian bride to enter the palace was brought by Suleiman the Magnificent. So in fact, Ukrainian brides became both the mothers of many princes and sultans and the protectors of our ancestors who served them. The peace of the Ottoman Empire. However, the reason for finding it, unless there was a threat from Crimea, is actually clear. Just like today, back then, the natural harbor could accommodate a giant fleet.
Let's live then, let's live then. I have become the era, my homeland, oh, my beautiful village.
Ukraine is related to both our distant and recent history. This relationship is not limited to the bombardments of Sevastopol and Odessa, which were the reasons for the Ottoman Empire entering World War I. Nearly half of the present-day Ukrainian territories were under Ottoman rule until the 19th century, creating strong cultural ties with the Crimean Tatars. and resulting in frequent and intense population movements. We can say that the Tatars, still living in the region, continue to preserve and work to maintain their language and culture despite all pressures. In a way, we can say that the legacy left to the Turkish world by Ismail Gasparalı, one of the first to advocate for cross-border national and linguistic unity, still lives on, even if it sometimes struggles. The Crimean Tatars were subjected to forced migration twice, in 1783 and 1944. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, they returned from the deserts to which they had been exiled and once again became the main Muslim element of Ukraine. However, the issue did not remain in the past. It has carried over to the present day.
Dear brothers and sisters, I would like to convey my warmest and most sincere greetings to you on behalf of the Crimean Tatar National Assembly, which represents the path of your blood brothers, the Crimean Tatar Turks, who have their homeland in one of the most beautiful corners of southeastern Europe.
The representative of the Crimean Tatars and the leader of this struggle. It was Mustafa Kemal Karamoğlu, who stood out with his pacifist stance. Turkey supported him at every opportunity. However, we can say that it was hardly noticed when he was detained at Moscow airport in 2014 and not allowed into Crimea. Following this, the Crimean Tatars carried out many actions. I wonder if any of you remember. Putin not only declared the demonstrations as an attempt to disrupt public order, but also threatened to shut down the Crimean Tatar National Assembly. Their fate seemed to be shaped by Turkey-Russia relations in those days. So, how did Russia and Ukraine, who entered the 20th century as comrades, become enemies? Or were they always enemies, and are we just now realizing it? The modern history of Ukraine began with the establishment of the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic at the end of World War I. The era of the Tsarist Russian Khanate had ended, and the revolution had granted the Ukrainian people a republic. However, its independence lasted only 3 years. The Red Army was determined to keep this second, most valuable element of the Soviet system united. The country that joined the Soviet Union experienced a period of famine in the 1930s, known as the Holodomor. Millions of people died of starvation. The cause of the famine was neither a natural disaster, nor drought, nor a poor harvest. The Stalin regime used the famine as a weapon to annihilate the Ukrainian people. In 1933, under a military siege similar to today's, tens of thousands of people lost their lives every day. And all these events remained hidden throughout the 20th century. However, it was never forgotten in Ukraine.
Our Ukrainian brothers and sisters remember their past pain, but look to the future with hope. We wish them a speedy recovery.
The tragedy continued even after the Second World War. Under German occupation, millions of Ukrainians lost their lives again. By the year 1945, to determine the new order after the war, the leaders of the three great powers, Churchill, Roosevelt and Stalin, decided to meet in Yalta. Hopes blossomed. This time, Ukraine did not smile due to drought. After Stalin, a Ukrainian named Khrushchev took over the leadership of the Soviet Union. During his era, Crimea was returned to Ukraine, and it seemed like the fate of the country was about to change. However, Khrushchev was removed from office in a coup in 1964. He was accused by the official publication Pravda with the following attributes: selfish, stubborn, hasty, indecisive, idealistic, and a chatterbox. Ultimately, he was relieved of his duties by the Communist Party, leaving Ukraine orphaned and helpless once again. The nuclear reactor accident that occurred in Chernobyl on April 26, 1986, clearly reminded us of how close Ukraine actually is to Turkey. The resulting radioactive fallout caused hundreds of thousands of people to evacuate the area, led to thousands of cancer cases, and threatened Turkey's tea and hazelnut production on the opposite shore, this meaning this shore. The Minister of Industry at the time, Cüneyt Özdemir, launched a campaign to prove that the tea and hazelnuts in the Black Sea region were not exposed to radiation following this nuclear disaster. By drinking the radioactive tea in front of the cameras, he left a moment filled with shame in Turkey's political history. Ukraine was re-emerging on the stage of history in 1991. It became one of the three countries that, together with Belarus and Russia, made a joint decision to officially dissolve the Soviet Union. During the transition to capitalism, under the leadership of Kravchuk, the first president of independent Ukraine, and his successor Kuchma, the economy developed rapidly. Good relations were established and developed with both Russia and NATO. Kravchuk was a columnist, while Kuchma was a rocket engineer and a guitarist. Due to its Soviet legacy, Ukraine possessed the third largest nuclear weapons inventory in the world. It agreed, or was persuaded, to abandon its nuclear weapons with assurances from the Western world. By 1996, it was completely disarmed of this power. The West was backing it. The United States and European countries had assured Ukraine that they would support it in the event of a possible Russian invasion. In a manner of speaking, this was how Ukrainians were first let down by the West. During Kuchma's second term, the situation had changed. Opposition newspapers were being shut down, journalists were falling victim to unsolved murders, and corruption reports were becoming rampant. Protests increased, and eventually led to the Orange Revolution. Yushchenko became the new candidate against Russian dominance. Yushchenko, who became unrecognizable due to being poisoned before the 2004 election, spent most of the campaign period in a hospital in Vienna and pointed to Putin as the perpetrator. The incident was reminiscent of a James Bond movie. Putin's agents were chasing dissidents in different countries, searching for and hunting people with poisonous syringes in hand. The liquid that poisoned Yushchenko was an orange poison called dioxin, used by the American military during the Vietnam War. Although the issue remained on the world agenda for a long time, it was never fully clarified. Putin didn't even care at all. The people who found the election unfair and protested the results dressed in orange and set up camp in Independence Square, leading to the overthrow of the pro-Russian Yanukovych on allegations of fraud. They did not leave until the dioxin victim, Yushchenko, arrived. The goal was to become part of Europe and make an economic and social leap. However, dreams and reality once again did not align in Ukraine. Economist Yushchenko, the architect of the system that elevated the national currency, the hryvnia, could not achieve political stability after 2005, no matter what he did. It was during those days that Tymoshenko, the blonde and beautiful woman, stepped onto the stage. She was one of the leaders of the Orange Revolution. She made a very glamorous entrance into politics. She was even elected as prime minister. But she too would face disappointment. This businesswoman, whose name was mentioned among the most powerful women in the world, and who was a trendsetter with her hairstyle, was suddenly imprisoned on charges of corruption in the natural gas sector and allegedly ordering the murder of a business rival. She resisted. She tried to prove that the accusations were fabricated, but she was silenced through torture. She had to endure a tough time in prison until she was exonerated. Yanukovych, who narrowly surpassed Demyshenko, did not benefit from being in power either. His move to align with Russia instead of the European Union would lead to events known as Euromaidan. In 2014, Independence Square was occupied once again. The events erupted once more. This time, the country was on the brink of civil war, when the parliament decided to hold elections and issued an arrest warrant for the crime of killing civilians. Yanukovych fled from Kiev and was sentenced in absentia to 13 years in prison for treason. Indeed, protesters who entered the former president's mansion encountered an incredible wealth of unknown origin, including a private zoo, an underground shooting range, a golf course, a fleet of cars, and a mega yacht. Finally, Russia's new move came. It annexed Crimea through a regional referendum. The war in Donbas began. The Minsk Agreement, signed in the same year, lasted only 2 weeks, and the war continued as the parties violated the ceasefire. In 2015, Germany and France began mediation efforts. As a result, the second Minsk Agreement was signed in Belarus. Today, Ukraine relies on that protocol. It uses the provision for the withdrawal of all foreign armed formations against Russia. Putin claims that he is not bound by those conditions, arguing that he is not a party to the conflict. Is the rest of Ukraine next? Everyone is wondering about this. The world has been asking this question since the beginning of 2022. Everyone is curious about what will happen in the new season of the Ukraine series against Putin. The current president of the country is Zelensky, who won the 2019 election and took office. He is a screenwriter, comedian, and director. Can an artist solve the equation that politicians cannot unravel? Will he be able to solve it? We will all see together. It is now clear that Putin wants to reclaim some of the values that have distanced Russia from being a superpower. He defines the two countries as one people, one whole. However, he still claims that he is not planning an invasion. The gathering of troops and accumulation of military equipment at the Ukrainian border does not escape NATO's attention. Putin is also issuing a warning, with simultaneous exercises in all oceans and against a possible intervention. Meanwhile, there are calls for regional independence from Russian-backed separatists in Ukraine. With so much activity, would the United States stay away? Of course not. In early February, it announced that a Russian conspiracy plan had been uncovered. According to this plan, which would justify an attack on Ukraine, Moscow was going to stage a fake explosion and shoot a propaganda video. We don't know if this revelation disrupted the Kremlin's balance, but the White House was saying that the invasion could still happen at any moment and continue. As journalists, we are still waiting with curiosity as we prepare this documentary for broadcast. One thing is certain: if the invasion happens, it will be watched live on social media. Let's take a look at the bigger picture, if you will. Moscow wants NATO to stop its military exercises, withdraw its forces, and for Ukraine not to join the organization. Otherwise, it says, don't blame me. Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, is calling on his citizens not to panic, but he says the Kremlin's real aim is not invasion, but to destabilize Ukraine through insidious means. Nevertheless, the Ukrainian army is forming reserve forces across the country and increasing its defense capabilities. One of the key countries is Germany. Nord Stream 2 is a 764-mile natural gas pipeline extending from Russia to Germany. The moment Germany, the world's largest buyer of Russian gas, gives approval, Russia's dominance in the European energy market will multiply. Chancellor Scholz has not said that Nord Stream 2 will be cancelled if there is an invasion. He cannot say it either. After all, the issue has one end in China and the other in the United States. It seems like it has turned into a big tug of war. Everyone is clinging to both the rope and life from one side. Let's also take a look at the smaller picture, if you like. Turkey is offering to mediate between Russia and Ukraine. It does not want to get involved among those pulling the rope. It is content with saying, "Stop, you are actually brothers." However, as seen, those who set out as companions on the road never actually walk together. One of Turkey's counterparts is Russia, which, driven by historical impulses, claims everything in its possession. The other is the West's stepchild, wanting to determine its own destiny. The land of sorrows, Ukraine. What do you see when you look at this whole picture? What I see is this. Ukraine seems to be searching for an Atatürk it couldn't find after 1917, longing for one.